Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to the museum. Glad to have you here with us, and I appreciate you getting out in this weather to be here. So I will remind you, as I've reminded everyone else so far today, this may be the safest building in town. You're correct. We're still a certified bomb shelter in the lobby, and then downstairs is the civil defense shelter as well. So remember that for the next zombie apocalypse. All right, so I'm going to quickly take you through as quick as I can. We should finish by 1. So I'm going to kind of go through and just highlight the 100 years of the museum. It's very difficult to do, as you probably would imagine, and I picked things that were fun for me, and so some of you will be in these slides, maybe, from the years past. Who knows? It's a lot of history, and it's also just a lot of things that happen here as well. So, as you know, we're celebrating our centennial, and of course, we always have to start with Lauren, because really, we're very fortunate. Unfortunately, they passed away, but really, we wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. And you all know your local history, and you've heard me say it over and over. You know, Eastman Gardner finally came here in the 1890s from Clinton, Iowa. When they got here, there was not much. Laurel was very primitive. This is our exact location where City Hall is downtown today. And they came, though, from Clinton, Iowa. So this is the Eastman's house on 5th Avenue in Clinton, Iowa. So they get to Jones County, and this is like a very rural, not a very advanced place in the world. And so the Gardners and the Eastmans all lived side by side in Iowa. So on 5th Avenue. So a lot of people, you hear lots of stories that they laid the town out and they picked 5th Avenue because it sounded more expensive and they went other directions. All we've ever heard is they picked 5th Avenue because back then there were no house numbers. And so if you wanted to mail something, it was, Mr. and Mrs. Lauren Chase Eastman, 5th Avenue, Clinton, Iowa. And if they wanted to mail something down here, Mr. and Mrs. George S. Gardner, 5th Avenue, Laurel, Mississippi. It's just a lot easier if your streets are the same. So they lived on 5th Avenue in Iowa, and that's 5th Avenue in Iowa, the Eastman's home. And of course, they came here and bought Mr. Camper's mill, which about where the mall is located. He had provided all the railroad ties for the New Orleans and Northeast Railroad. And so he thought he was through with trees. They were looking to expand and get away from hardwoods and come into the Pine Belt, and they did. Their first mill turned a profit in 1896, a pretty large mill. And as you know, Sawmill Square Mall was down in a bowl. They could dam it up, they could hold water, and they could float logs in it. And so that's what you're looking at. So you're looking at the mill pond, basically where the mall is located today. And they, of course, went all the way from the mall to the railroad track. And their first office buildings were right there on the edge of downtown. Originally, they set up shop with different buildings, and it expanded to that quickly. You all have seen this in lots of different variations around town. This is the Eastman Gardner building, which is right on Ellisville Boulevard, facing the railroad track. We think this photo is from the early 1920s. It's the first time we knew of a airplane being in town. And I don't think it was a balloon. We would have shot it down, but I think it may have been an airplane. But you get the sense of how vast the mill is. You got to remember, Eastman Gardner at this time would have had 2,000 employees. So that's big. And they were one of 4 sawmills, but they were the largest. It also explains why downtown just stops right at those parking lots. So it wasn't they tore down things too much. It's just that Eastman Gardner was so vast. And so some of these buildings, of course, still exist. If you know where they are, we're goodness gracious and the resale shop, Remnant and all that are in those. But the mill went all the way back to it. And so it was very modern for its time when they did it. But of course, Laurel started off pretty primitive. I love this shot. This is from the front lawn of St. John's Day School, or George and Captain Marshall Gardner's house, looking through that fence to what was the original St. John's Church. Okay, that wooden structure, as you know, still exists. When they built the new church, they just moved it to the back side. So the wooden chapel, they use it as a chapel now on the back side. and that's when the church was finished around 1960, when the church was completed. And as you can see, there's nothing next door. We were a vacant lot, right? There was no building on this site, because always the intent was for Lauren, who grew up across the street, to come back and build his house here on this site. So of course, Catherine Marshall Gardner was the cultural matriarch of the town. This is our portrait by Sir James Jabusa Shannon. Please know, I hear a lot of times people say that it was a full-length portrait and they cut her legs off at some point, and that is not true. It's always been that size. We have a photo of it in her home, and it's always been that size. And so it's on the wall. I hope as you go out today, you look, because it has a frame on it that has just been restored. It's the original frame, and it's totally been redone for the anniversary. It's really beautiful. And of course, this would have been more of what she looked like in the 20s. She died, of course, in the mid-1930s. But she was incredible. And her home, you all are very familiar with. 1899 is when it was built, very colonial revival in its architecture. And she collected baskets and then displayed them in her home. And she was really a modern-day curator, even though she was just a layperson who read a lot and then became very good at what she wanted to collect. And I tell people all the time, everybody has a collection or something they collect, but when you have a focus, it's really good. And she had a focus. Her focus were handmade utilitarian baskets, and she wanted every tribe in North America that was making baskets in 1900. There were 82 of them. She collected 81 of them before she died. And the one that she didn't have was Seminole, and we've since added to it with it. But she would have them on view in her house. You can see them in the billiard room. And so you can see them inside cases just on top. Some of these, we don't know where they are now. I wish we knew. I'm not sure whatever happened to some of them. We got the bulk of them we can identify. And she would even store them in different cases in other rooms. That house was amazing. Of course, they had a system to let light in and out, of course, as a gallery room. Her portrait would have been on this wall over here. That painting is that one right there on the wall. This is in the European gallery, straight through over there. So really an amazing woman and a wonderful collector. And I just love that. That's a Christmas scene of her house at one point. Of course, once there were lights and electricity. So we, of course, got them in 1923. Our very first official gift was her collection of over 400 Native American baskets. And if you've never seen it, I had never really seen it. I've seen it before, but not paid a lot of attention to it. But this year, we have an exhibition downstairs called Lauren's Legacy. Our curator, Kristen, did a terrific job of looking at how the collection was put together over the last 100 years. And so it's kind of broken down by decades downstairs. And it includes the very first basket, the very first thing ever accessioned to the collection. It is not anything remarkable to look at. So that's why it's never really out. But it's a great birch bark basket downstairs, and it's on view now as part of that exhibit. So I hope you go down there and look at it if you would like today. But we had them, of course, stored on either side. The reading room, as you all know, originally was an art gallery. And it was originally called the Eastman Room, named for Lauren's grandparents. And we would not be here today had Lauren not passed away, but we really are only here because of these two people. Lauren and Chase Eastman and his wife were the people responsible for creating this institution. And Lauren's parents kind of carried it out, but the vision really and the purpose was set particularly by Mr. Eastman. Lauren was his only grandchild. Lauren's mom was their only child. And so they kind of had put everything into him, especially from the standpoint of Eastman Gardner Lumber Company. But they had accumulated a great deal of wealth. They never moved to Laurel. They remained in Clinton, Iowa, that home I showed you earlier. But they would come visit a lot, and they really thought that had Lauren lived, he was going to do a lot for the community. And so Mr. and Mrs. Eastman, their name is lost in a lot of Laurel history. And so hopefully this year we learn a lot about them, and we will praise them as much as we can as well. Of course, Lauren's dad, Mr. Rogers, really, as they say, they told us, Lauren, he picked out every board in the building. when it was built, just about. And then Lauren's mom, who was the only Eastman daughter, Nana, was special. Nana, of course, she kind of was in charge of building First Presbyterian Church. Mr. Rogers was kind of in charge of building the museum. Both, of course, were built in memory of Lauren. So Lauren, of course, was your typical, probably, let me rephrase that, not your typical Laurel boy, I would not imagine. He finished high school early. We have essays, we have handwritten essays by him when he was like in 8th grade on the histories of famous music composers. I mean, he discussed, it's like he had written an encyclopedia. I don't think he cheated. I think he wrote them, but I don't know with it. But Lauren was very involved, loved sports, played baseball, actually went to Princeton, was on the tennis team at Princeton when he went there. Finished at Laurel High School at Central. Gardner wasn't open yet. And so he finished and did 1 year of prep school in New Jersey at the age of 17 before going to Princeton at that point. So at the time when they first moved here, though, Lauren didn't live in the home across the street. He was born in 1898. So when he was born, there were several houses just like this on Maple, which was right across the railroad track from downtown. Y'all remember, if you're from here, you remember where Marie's used to be, right? Right across from the general store. That is where all the homes were. And they all lived there, and there were 5 houses, and they all looked alike. They were all just side by side. And that's the wooden houses, all painted brown, that they lived in when they moved here from Iowa. And then, of course, they then made a go of it in this house was 1902, the house across the street, Lauren's childhood home, made of redwood. Of course, it's been added on to and been painted since then. As far as we know, it was painted probably in the 1920s, and I'll explain that in a second there. Of course, so Lauren grew up there and met his wife, Lilia, when he was at Princeton. And this is my favorite. This is a watercolor Lauren painted when he was 12 years old. And so that's the only known art there is. People walk in the door every day and assume Lauren was a woman and that she was an artist. And say, no, it was a man, and he only painted one thing that we know of, and this is it. And so, but we do have that one watercolor down in the archive, which is fun. This is his postage stamp collection book on the left. We were fortunate to have some of his books, including a very old and rare Alice in Wonderland book that's kind of nice to have from a value standpoint, downstairs in the collection as well. So he meets Lilia. They get married, as you can see, October the 9th of 1920. They get married. Of course, they come back to Laurel, and there's a proper country club reception. Come meet them. That's Friday, the 19th of November. They come back. They honeymooned in Lake Placid, New York, got married in East Orange, New Jersey, at the First Presbyterian Church, of course, and came back and had a party here. So when Lauren passes away, these are the contents of his wallet. So he had calling cards, nice engraved calling cards. It was expired, but he also had, that was his pass to get into every athletic event at Princeton, except it was not good for Harvard football or the Harvard and Yale baseball games. See, there were premium seats even at that point when they did it. This was his YMCA card. This was his Laurel Chamber of Commerce card. Register for the draft, that's that. Lauren had just purchased, in September of 1920, a 59 Series 1920 Cadillac. So I thought I'd throw a picture in there for you to see what it looks like. But I ran the serial number, and that car was delivered to Jacksonville, Florida in July of 1920. And then from there, somehow, that's the end of it, of where it got managed and sent. So somehow in Laurel, he ended up with a new Cadillac, and that's how he purchased it. It was almost $1,000 at the time to purchase it. You could buy one at auction now for about $24,500 if it's fully restored, which is kind of cool to know. But that is his, and look, we think our taxes are high now. Look, it was $5.33 to register that in 1920. So, And of course, he was building his house on this site. So this is what we looked like, though, in 1900. St. John's Church. Random houses, parking lot back there now. Of course, nothing around us because we were extremely primitive. There was not much growth in 1900, and that's what the museum lot would have looked like. More than likely taken from the Phil Gardner house across the street. This is another shot, another view. Looking back, Catherine, this is your house. Okay, so this we then know this must be well after 1910. The house caught on fire in 1908, was moved down. So we're corn in our spot. You can see the hospital in the background. It got developed. And I was about to say, the other house is Bill Tim's house right there. Gardner Park, look, Gardner Park was not developed yet. Gardner Park was more 1914 when it was added and cleared out. So the park itself was still swampland just about as it came through. Prior to that, we were a tennis court. Look, Wisteria is there. There's no Chisholm House. There's no Stancil. Grandiflora, not built at all either. So this is even earlier from late 1800s when our front lot was a tennis court. So, of course, as you all know, the home that was across from the church caught fire on December 10th of 1908 at a wedding reception, and they moved it down the hill. And so because we were a vacant lot, that is where Lauren's house was being built. If you have not been downstairs and have never seen them, I did not put a slide in, I meant to. I pulled out the architectural plans and the renderings of what Lauren's house was going to look like. So they are in a display case downstairs to your right. When you go down there, you can see the facade of Lauren's home had it been finished, and the floor plan for it. Because it's a nice, as we like to say, a nice 4-bedroom starter house here in the historic district when we did it. So of course, that's what it looked like when Lauren unfortunately passed away in in July of 1921. And when he died, it was about 60% complete. They used the woods from that, and the windows had already been ordered and were in. And they built a couple of bungalows down Fifth Avenue, right before you get to Jones Junior High. Of course, our wooden brick streets that you see. And so we opened May 1st of 1923. So you can tell when the trees were planted by this photo at the time. And so, of course, we're there, and this is a wonderful plaque. You probably come to the museum all the time, but to your right in the library is this wonderful Tiffany bronze plate, which really tells what we do. There's one over the door. It's very simple. It says, "In Memoriam, Lauren Eastman Rogers for the advancement of learning." This one basically sums it up as well. And to assist in completing work he would have done, this building has been erected by his grandfather, Lauren Chase Eastman, for the benefit of this community and state. And so the Eastman Memorial Foundation was founded in 1922, and then it took them a year to build us and open us in May, dedication in May of 1923. And so through the years we've changed. I love the fact, and Bill Timms measured this one time. This photo was taken from the front door of the Rogers Greenhouse across the street, and when you open the doors, which they did for this photo, and you focus, that big painting was hanging on this wall, and they focused all the way through 450 feet uninterrupted to the very back of the gallery where I'm standing now to take that photo. So of course, quarter sawn oak throughout the building. They wanted us to look colonial. They didn't want it to look like a modern building in the 1920s. That's the original reading room. You all know it as it is today, and it stayed that way until Lauren's parents passed away. And when Mr. and Mrs. Rogers died, he died in 43, she died in 1950. Lauren's widow Lilia had it converted to a reading room into what you know of as today. Prior to that, though, this was called the Eastman Gallery, and that was the name of it and how it was described. So we quickly then opened in 1925 the remaining portion you're sitting in today, what's under that door is really basically where the second set of doors is as you come down the hall. So the hallway was there originally, and this was an office at the very end of it. And so they quickly dug out the downstairs, which if you grew up here, you know was the public library. So this is the room you're sitting in. We're looking at it as if I'm looking back that way today. Some of these paintings, most of them are in the room still today in lots of various different places, including those same benches There are two of those benches back there. Todd's sitting on one right now in the very back of this room with it. Of course, they had skylights at the original time, which we have since closed, as you know. And of course, great radiators. They have steam heat to keep us warm. Downstairs was the public library. Reference was upstairs. You all have nightmares of term papers up there. And so, but downstairs was fun. If you grew up here, especially those that may have passed on, people loved coming to the library, not so much because I was told they wanted books, but because it was the basement of the museum and it was always cooler down there. And so in the summertime, the 1920s and 30s in particular, they would come because it was a lot colder in the downstairs basement. So this kind of explains a little bit about the actual rededication ceremony. I know this sounds weird. It's a beautiful ceremony. And on May 1st of this year, at 1:30 in the afternoon, we're going to recreate the dedication of the museum. It's a great printed, we have the entire printed program. It's about a 25-minute program that involves lots of people from the community. And we're going to have the people that are in those current roles will come and speak and say the exact words that were said when we were dedicated. So you'll be invited to that, and I hope you'll come. It's on a Monday this year. Of course, Lauren's death, other things were built because of that. So this is First Presbyterian Church, which was a wonderful wooden structure. It was beautiful. And we've got great photos of it from different angles. There was an extra addition, other buildings behind it as well, but great woodwork inside and out. And they were looking to build a bigger church when Lauren passed away. And so Lauren's family then said, okay, let's do that as well. And so the interior of the church looked like that originally when it was first built. So they had a service, and then this is just 3 days after the last service. You can see them taking the church down. That same intersection, of course, there was a streetcar line that went right beside First Pres, in front of First Baptist, down behind the old Ramada, and it stopped behind at the school, which is where Regions Bank is located, right? It stopped there. It didn't go all the way to the country club, but it got pretty close. And so that's the streetcar line that went down that road. And so 1925, the church was finished. And it's an amazing, as you all know, that story, pre-Reformation, 13th century Gothic design. And the backside is 15th century. It was intentionally built to be built over 300 years old with it, and a beautiful facility. The windows were donated by Lauren's widow, and her family gave the money for those. They're incredible, and we will, in May as well, be doing a special tour of that church as well. If you've never seen it, Bill Timms has done a great script. It's about an hour-long tour of just that church, if you ever want to take it. So we're going to offer that opportunity in May, hopefully, too. Lauren's death also led to the fact that we needed a proper cemetery, right? Or a garden, is what they did. Lauren was buried in Hickory Grove Cemetery, and the gardeners were still there. You've seen the big gardener stone that marks their graves on the way to Walmart. Well, Lauren was buried there first, and then Lake Park Cemetery was built after that. And Root and Hollister, the same landscape design firm that did Gardner Park, Daphne Park, Euclid Park, it wasn't the Homestead firm. They plotted out those parks and then came and plotted out this cemetery as well. And it's absolutely amazing. Right in the middle, you can't see it driving around, but in the center circle, there's a big rock that says Rogers on it. And that's Lauren, at that point, was the only grave in front of it. But that's where Lauren is buried. And so if you ever are out and about and want to take a tour of it, get out of your car and go look. It's really beautiful. Gardner School was built by the family, as you all know, and we're doing something pretty special this year. We commissioned an artist out of Oxford named Charlie Buckley, and Charlie does these wonderful paintings where he comes into a community and he will do buildings, but he stacks them on top of each other, makes a big building collage like a pyramid. And so he's going to go through and take every building that the Gardners and the Eastmans and the Rogers built in Laurel and make one big collage painting for us for our centennial. He is the April artTALK. We'll unveil the painting and he will be here to talk about it. So be sure and come back for that. when he does it. But Gardner School was finished in the 1920s. The football field in front of it was before that. So even if you went to Central Laurel High School, you still came down the hill to play football with it. And so David McNeil remembers that his grandmother went to school with Lauren, and so they would come and go down and they would eat on the brick bleachers of the old Gardner Park track in the football field. And they said they always loved it when Lauren, because they all brought their lunch, and Lauren always had the most exquisite and odd things. And so she said that one time that his grandmother remembers looking over and Lauren was showing them olives. They had never seen the olives before, but Catherine Marshall Gardner had brought some olives back on a trip. And so she said he was trying to somehow cut them up small enough where people could taste them. Because he couldn't explain what they tasted like. So anyway, with it. But he would do that at that football field. Of course, School Street was the street where the schools were all back to back to back. Of course, Central, which is where you pay your car tags now. There were 3 schools in a row, down to the post office, of course, that were all part of the education system here in Laurel. And of course, they also built Oak Park, which was the first African-American, municipally supported African-American high school in Mississippi as well. Another part of their legacy here as well. They also were very instrumental and were the reason the Laurel Country Club was built. And so, as you know, it was patterned after Augusta National. They brought in designers, and they designed not just Seymour Dunn to design this, but Seymour Dunn plotted out 2 other 18-hole courses to be all together. And they never built the other 2. But it's kind of unique to think about today that, 110 years ago, they were thinking, they were so far advanced going, wait a minute, what if we build 3 golf courses and people would come here from all over to come play golf and spend several days here? Now people do it all the time, but for back then it was pretty wild to think about. But they brought him in to do the golf courses there. We've got some, y'all seen these photos at the country club. We've got great ones in the archives as well. We've got some wonderful ones looking back. And all you see are but there are no trees really, nothing but smokestacks. You can just see the smokestacks from all the lumber companies in the districts as they did them. So again, we bebopped along and opened May 1st of 1923. So back to the museum. And from 1923 on, really education has been our focus. And so you can see everything from charming old rugs to every time there was a picture exhibit, which we don't even say anymore, Southern States Arts League, a little of everything through the years that we've collected. And of course, it was written up all over the place. This is a 1928 article for Illinois Central Magazine, which you would imagine at the time was a pretty big deal to be in. And it highlighted not only Lauren, but really the opening of the museum and the library. They were in Country Living. We had magazines through the years every time the building was celebrated. And it was kind of marveled at the time. It was kind of really new. And I remind people, there weren't a lot of art museums in the South. The New Orleans Museum of Art was the Delgado Museum. It's older, but the High Museum of Art is only 1 year older than us. So it was founded, a lot of these museums were kind of new to the Southeast at the time when this one was done. And so they would do shows all the time. So this is one, I loved it, it's kind of different. Women artists were never featured. Well, this is a 1927 exhibit. There's only one guy down here, William Woodward, who was great from New Orleans, and we have some of those pieces, but that's what we had. When you think about the fact that Marie Hull had her first show here in 1927, that's Marie Hull up here, the sharecropper, the top right scene, that's that artist. And so it's just great to see how they did things back then with it. This is Will Henry Stevens, another important Southern artist. This is a 1929 exhibit. He's pretty famous. This is was on loan to the museum from Sophie Newcomb, the art school at Tulane. And one of the pieces in there, we had several shows, and then later in life, he passes away. And then, gosh, about 10 years ago, descendants of the family find us and say, hey, we'd like to donate some of we have paintings, we have some smaller watercolors that we'd love to donate to museums. We get the list, and some of the ones they offer us are the ones that are on this list from an exhibit in 1929 here. So it's just kind of cool stuff like that we're doing. As you know, we've had Da Vinci, the machines exhibit several times. This is the first one in the 1950s. We had one 6 years ago, I guess was the last one we had when they were here. I love this shot because it shows you the back of the museum, but just shows you the vines that overtake everything in Jones County. And so look, they had ivy growing over everything on the back of it. But at the same time, that was a 1950s shot of the museum. So this is just a typical exhibition schedule for 52 and 53. So look, English portraits and landscapes. So Gainsborough, Constable, Turner, Reynolds. I mean, incredible list. An Andrew Bucci exhibit, religious prints, the annual National Watercolor Show, African sculpture, and Scalamandre textiles, paintings by Swedish children. John McCready, a great Mississippi artist that a lot of people know about, 34 paintings from the Whitney Museum of American Art that was traveling the country. And so it's just really a photographic show, and then something's going to be announced later. That's just a while down the road. We'll get to it eventually. This is 56, another great one, Memphis Academy of the Arts. There were always collegiate shows, which was, I think, an important part of museums. And to them, it was a great William Hollingsworth show. Alvin Sella, who was a really important Southern artist. And then Byron Look, the Mississippi Art Colony from Stafford Springs. That's a show from 1964, a Stafford Springs show for that one as well with it. This is a 1965. We had both Mark Chagall and William B. Turner. I mean, wow. In Little Laurel, kind of fun. And luckily, opening tea on those Sundays to have it. It's sweet little, Jean Golden's still alive, y'all. Isn't that great? Her daughter was just here the other day. But, Jean's still around. Lives in an assisted living facility in Jackson. But she was the hostess in 65 for that. So, of course, art classes have always been important. Of course, our all-time favorite, Amarita Gordon in the top left. But this is a class out in our studio outside where we still do those today. Interestingly enough, a strong emphasis on pottery, which is still what we do. Hillary will tell you most of the class that fills up the quickest is always pottery when we offer it. So in the 70s, things get a little funkier from time to time. And so this is a great program. I knew you wish you were there, but it's Porgy and Bess with Marie Bellicar as the soprano. So you can only imagine what that sounded like. That's the program from it at that point. That's a Walter Anderson show from 1975. I just loved it because the graphic was so cool with it. And as y'all know, we have a great new Lynn Emery kinetic sculpture outside. Well, this is the invitation to her show here in 1977 when she came and spoke and was here for that exhibit with it. So, of course, the Guild has always been a very important part of what we do. Our volunteers have done a lot. Of course, they used to always decorate the Christmas tree and do programs around it. And we were trying this morning to decide who that was. But if you know who that is, let us know. You may be here, or maybe you may know who they are. We'll go back to it afterwards and look. So people would always come. I love the fact that one year in December, Wyatt Cooper came back and talked. Of course, he was married to Gloria Vanderbilt. This is Anderson Cooper's daddy, right? And so he got back to, he had come and spoken, and they gave him back to take back to Washington these ornaments and things made with cotton bolls. And so he came back, so he wrote a note back and says, thank you for the late holiday greetings it came in at the end of 77. The boys love their Christmas tree ornaments. So that is Anderson Cooper there, and that's his brother on the right from his dad's visit to Laurel. Elaine de Kooning came here in 79 for an exhibit for Works on Paper exhibition, which is really a lot of fun. Of course, this is where you'll start seeing a lot of familiar faces because, as I mentioned, the docent program, how wonderful all those folks are. Look, even Amelia's up there in the top right with it. So. Of course, the one collecting area that the family didn't start was our Gibbons George and Silver collection. And so it's only appropriate to put Thomas and Harriet Gibbons in here today. And so They gave the beginning of their works in the 1970s. The rest came in the early 80s, and it's an incredible collection, as you all know. Really fortunate to have a lot of people through the years have participated in it. And of course, I love that one because it's got Rose Helen and Von Seal and Shirley in it, and so who really took the time to document and celebrate that collection when it was first given to us by that point. We've been nationally accredited since 1973. Had a site visit in 72. They didn't start the program until 1972. So we were one of the first and earliest of museums in the country. Just know that less than 10% of all museums in the country are accredited. And so it's really a big honor for us. We are going to do that this year, as a matter of fact. Our self-study was due March the 1st, and I hit the finish button last Thursday, so we have gotten everything turned in, and they're going to send 2 people to come and look us over and spend 2 days, and they have picked the month of July. So I hope they send somebody from the north, because they're going to be here and be so miserable. They'll go fast and be in a hurry to leave when they come check us out. So I also love it because we've been doing a lot, especially with the Choctaw for a lot of time. This is a 1972 actual photo of the Choctaw weavers. And of course, the Turners were a great family that grew up here. They gave William Turner grew up here and then gave money upon his death. They used those funds to help renovate downstairs when it was turned into an art gallery and the public library moved out with them. And then we finally started having what they called the Patrons Ball here at the museum in the 1980s. And so it was shocking to have a black tie dinner and dance in the museum. It was very controversial. You should read the board minutes. I've been told by Bobby Lou Green that Stuart Gilchrist was like, "You're gonna have live music in these hallowed halls," and they did. And I think they enjoyed it. They danced, had a good time, and they had no money for decorations, so that's why they just painted sticks white and hung lights on them. So being decorations chair was a lot easier back then through the years. So a lot of y'all know Buck Pennington, who was the director here for 6 years. So that's a picture of Buck at that one. You may see some familiar faces in the room in some of these shots as we go through. There's Jeanette, actually. Great. Of course, Stuart and Jean. I don't know who that is on the right. So all kind of people came, including Martha Stewart. So Martha Stewart was here, and that's Forrest and Joan Stevens here. Laura Larsley had Martha Stewart come do a talk, and the reception was here at the museum. And that would have been, I think, 81. I think is when it was. She knocked on the prison at that point. There were lots of fun fashion exhibits related to Laurel Centennial. And so that's what these were from. They kind of celebrated 100 years of Laurel in the early 80s. And so you'll see those throughout the archives. And then, of course, there was an edition done. And that is Mike Full, who did the original edition for us in the early 80s, and then a new edition from 2013. Going over plans with Honorary Gordon, who was our registrar here for, 30-something years. They were sitting in the European gallery at that point, going through that part of the process. So that groundbreaking was done in 82. Governor Winter was here. And this sweet lady right there, we'll see a picture of her in a minute, is Lauren's widow. That is Lilia. So Lauren's widow, Lilia, came back. And I remind people all the time, Lauren was just so young when he died. Lilia didn't die until like 1990 or 91. And so Lauren was just so young. She was born in 1898. And so, again, I think the only person still alive in this photo is Jean Golden. There she is there. Because there's Max, there's Bobby Henson back there. So, of course, Jean Lindsay in the front. And so there was a groundbreaking. And so Lilia came back and did the groundbreaking at that point with her. And that's her daughter, Mary Henson Tarozzi. And Mary just passed away last year, a year ago, in January. For that. So that edition was done, and they dug out. And so one reason we are the safest place in town is they dug into the hill, and that's the original 1923 building. 1925 building, and they came and dug out and added on the office wings, and then all of us around it. This would have been a brick road, put up the side of the museum for staff parking. That addition was completed in the early 80s. And of course, there were lots of other shows throughout. I love that. That was Jeanette Walker and Nancy Graves hanging a textile exhibit at one point. That is 1993. That's the 70th anniversary. And so that is Ruth Giles, Nell Davis, and Amarita Gordon. Of course, all retired from the museum, but they were on the front lawn. And that was the very first year we ever had a Heritage Arts Festival. So that was 30 years ago in 1970 when that photo was taken. And apparently there were 70 candles on that cake. So this is 75th anniversary. So we moved along now. And so this is the last time we did a rededication ceremony was in 1998. And this is Jean Chisholm Lindsay doing a toast as part of that. The ceremony involves the minister at First Pres and the rector at the Episcopal Church next door at St. John's. It also involves the school superintendent, so that's why Dr. Owens is there. Charlie Kent would have been chair of the board at that point with it. And of course, since then, we've had lots of other people in this very spot. So that is Dale Chihuly, his exhibit up now. That's him speaking here in 2001 for our show, The Baskets exhibit, which was wonderful at the time when it was done with it. He showed images from Venice as part of that presentation in 01, so it's kind of fun to have this particular piece on view now in the Sanderson Gallery. Of course, Christo was here. His wife, Jean-Claude, had passed away a couple of years before this. This is him with school children downstairs as part of that exhibition. That was pretty fun. That was about 12 years ago, I guess. Of course, the biggest addition, space-wise, we've had came to us upon the death of Mr. and Mrs. Green across the street. So the Rogers, their family home, which had only been in the family now for 2 generations, Lauren's family and then the Greens. So we took possession of that in 2003. So that was another big milestone for us to move in and get that space. And of course, our highlight this year is going to be the Centennial. And this is the cover of our new catalog and book that will be coming out in May. I think you'll be pleased with it. It's a wonderful book. It's about 10 by 12. It's 260 pages. It's a beautiful hardback book that has not only history of the museum, a great essay by Kristen that's the history of the collection with lots of images and highlights, and then 100 of our best American and European works. So it celebrates paintings and sculpture and works on paper by all of them. It's a wonderful, nice, big coffee table book that I think you'll be proud of. We'll celebrate that on May the 3rd, on Wednesday. There'll be a lecture at 1:30, and then we'll have the catalog unveiled that day as well with it. And of course, that brings us to now. And of course, I had to end back with Mr. and Mrs. Eastman because, again, the 3 of them are why we're here. And so that's Lauren with his grandparents on their front porch in Clinton, Iowa. He was 12 years old at the time. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Bill. All right.
On the silver collection, the Georgians did reject the Gibbons symbol so many years ago that the collection was much too fine to be here at all.
Very good. We're gonna melt it down one day and put it together. No, it is a great collection, and kind of like Mrs. Gardner. And when you come to our in-depth talks, our docents hear this. Mrs. Gardner knew what she was looking for. And so she would trade, she would buy, they would send her a basket, and if she didn't think it was good enough, she would ship it back. And this is like, it wasn't easy in 1915 to do that. But she would send it back and say, no, I want one better. And so, but the Gibbons, I think, did that as well. Bill, they wanted only the best objects from that time frame, and I think that's why it is such a fine collection. And the same with the Japanese prints. They were all smart enough to use dealers and people to help them find them. And so Lauren's parents collected Japanese prints, as you know, but not until after we opened. They had friends, the Humes, Dr. Hume and his wife in New Orleans, and they collected them. Well, they hooked him up with Frederick Gookin, a dealer in Chicago, who was collecting them for every major museum in the country. And just so happened, Mr. Rogers found him, and that's who collected ours as well. And so they really knew who to go to. It also helped, they had a lot of money. That helped a lot too. You can form really good collections, but the other part of that is they had really good taste. That helps too. So, any other questions? All right, thank you very much for coming out in this weather. I appreciate it.